Alright, so here's a theory that many have had for a long time, including myself, but upon further thought, I also want to raise the theory after seeing the trailer about why Palpatine did not clone himself. So, Palpatine returning is obviously a big deal, but how he returned is something that interests me far more than anything. I've made many videos explaining all the in-depth stuff to do with Legends Palpatine coming back through cloning or, sucking the Force essence out of someone and becoming younger again, or even taking over the vessel of someone else. All of these could be possible. However, if they're going to use Legends content and lore, like him cloning himself, then we also need to use Legends lore to confirm or debunk it. So, as the leader of the Separatists and the Republic's Senate, he controlled both sides of the war. He started the cloning army on Kamino with the help of Dooku and Sifo Dyas. He was the leader behind that operation and knew everything that was going on. He could easily have had a bunch of clones for himself, which is what he did in the comics. However, I'm going to explain how this is virtually impossible, or at least extremely difficult. In Legends, let's take this quote from Kreia from Knights of the Old Republic 2. Yes, and what are they without the Force? Take the greatest Jedi Knight, strip away the Force, and what remains? They rely on it, depend on it, more than they know. Watch as one tries to hold a blaster, as they try to hold a lightsaber, and you will see nothing more than a woman, or a man, a child. So this is relatively true. I mean, besides all the skills and everything that they have, they do rely on the Force heavily to make sure that they can win. The Empire has had some success and a lot of failure with cloning Force sensitives. One, for example, is this. They experimented with stormtroopers. They made these Force-sensitive experimental stormtroopers that were impressive to both Palpatine and Vader. However, too impressive. Vader deemed them too dangerous for the Empire, himself and Palpatine. His suspicions were confirmed when the troopers later turned on them. Now in the comics, Palpatine made his own type of clone where he created a bunch of different vessels of himself that he could just jump into, at least consciously or spiritually. And these clones were all very powerful, however, they were just shells of his former self, and were dispatched rather easily by Luke. If cloning is successful with Force users, then it always ends up with something being wrong. They either end up suicidal, or just depressed, or manic, and insane. Palpatine cloning himself wouldn't be as easy as creating the clones. They were just regular humans, essentially. When you throw Force sensitivity into the mix, it never works out. We can see this is evident in the Force Unleashed 2 game, where they try and clone Galen Merrick with continuous failure. And even once they were successful, after failure upon failure, they even then weren't able to brainwash him to do their bidding, and he had constant clashes with his former self, which were, what I think, rifts in the Force just colliding. Who's to say that if Palpatine wasn't cloned after the exorbitant amount of times that they tried, that he would be A, just as powerful without any chip in his abilities, and B, his personality would be the exact same. Who's to say that he wouldn't just become a good guy all of a sudden? That's how unpredictable cloning is. There are so many different variables that need to be corrected and perfected in order for it to be a success. If we're going to stretch the possibilities of him successfully cloning himself, then I think it's prudent we lay all the possibilities of failure and success on the table. So let's say he spends the last 30 years cloning himself with continuous failure. Some clones are Force sensitive, but maybe at a fraction of his power, something close to maybe a youngling's abilities, or others have psychological problems. Remember, Palpatine was literally the perfect Sith. He was cunning, he was smart, he was unbelievably patient. I mean, he waited for Anakin to turn to the dark side by manipulating the strings behind the scenes for over 10 years. And he was unbelievably gifted in the Force. So let's say after 30 years of his trial and error, he finally does it. Palpatine has been cloned. He then would also have to make sure that the accelerated aging gene is put in there as well, which causes an array of different complications. So, let's say it took him 10 years to effectively clone himself after Return of the Jedi. Assuming he didn't do it already before, for argument's sake. Let's say it was all just a failure because we never saw a clone of him. At least, we think. That would mean he'd be 40 years old during the time of the Rise of Skywalker. Also assuming he ages twice as fast. He would be in his prime for sure at that point. However, there's still no telling whether or not the cloning process is effective for the duration of one's complete and full life, especially on their psychological health. And also, effectively cloning himself after Return of the Jedi, and the key word here is effectively, then he would have to do it less than 10 years before The Force Awakens. This would make him about the age of 20 during the Rise of Skywalker, which means that he'd be near the same age as Rey in Episode 7, who was 19. It really wouldn't be ideal for his full powers to be developed, just like Anakin, who was 23 during Revenge of the Sith, and was just starting to understand his full potential, regardless of him turning to the dark side or still being a Jedi. So, there are many variables with Palpatine cloning himself. That said, they could of course just decide to rewrite the rules of cloning if they do that, if they go that route, which I don't really think that they will. However, if they do, they'd be taking it from Legends, and to support the continuation of the story, they'd have to change things up, which would change what we know, but hopefully, then it'll still all make sense. Now, if he did successfully clone himself with 0 errors, then, well, the Resistance is pretty much done for. But we all know that probably won't happen. I really don't see them ending the saga with Palpatine killing all of the heroes. Of course, I could be wrong, and I've been wrong before, but I really don't think that's how they're going to do it. If they were going to do that, they should have done that in Episode 8, because then it leaves one more movie for them to make it more of a happy ending. Now, maybe it's not Palpatine who cloned himself to be alive for Episode 9, and he's actually in the film. He's been alive this entire time, basically since we saw him in The Phantom Menace, and of course his backstory before that, which most likely is going to be written now, or rewritten, by Lucasfilm and Disney, since Darth Plagueis is Legends, which was a super fantastic book. I highly recommend it, and actually I'll be covering some more stuff from that book in the coming weeks. That being said, Snoke. Now that we're on the topic of cloning, it kind of makes me wonder if he was a clone himself. If he is a clone of either Palpatine and maybe a mutation of some sort, or a clone of some Force-sensitive being that allowed Palpatine to use him as some sort of conduit, to be able to use his powers through him and control him from the unknown regions where he might have been staying. As we know, in canon, Palpatine was building an entire fleet of Star Destroyers in the unknown regions for many years. And this is where I think we see that clip from the trailer where we see all of those Star Destroyers. So if Snoke is a clone, this would kind of make sense as to why he's so beat up and scarred looking, because maybe something went wrong during the cloning process. Maybe they had to do something to this vessel or whoever he is in order to allow for Palpatine to control his mind and basically use him like a puppet. It's just a theory. From my point of view, it seems like Episode 7, 8, 9 has just gone perfectly well, pretty much, for the Resistance, almost. If you really think about it, it's Kylo that's suffering this entire time. He's just completely conflicted. He's upset that he's not as powerful as he should be. He's just in Vader's shadow, and he's extremely depressed by it. The entire trilogy is just sort of, it's revolving around Rey, but it's also revolving around Kylo not being good enough, and him not being able to accept that. And that's just the way they wrote it. I mean, I wish that he was extremely powerful, because I would love to be able to connect with him on that sense, kind of like I did with Anakin, how he was so cool and he was strong and he went through all these trials and tribulations of, being this failed apprentice, this failed Padawan who wasn't strong enough, got defeated by Dooku and then came back to beat him, and then lost to Obi-Wan, and then became Darth Vader, and then beat Obi-Wan. So there are so many of these ups and downs with these characters that I really, really like, because it's so realistic to society and to life, where not everyone is born perfect like Rey. Not everyone is just born with this immense perfect ability and power that you can just call upon at any moment and you never lose. That's why she's not much of a very comparable character to maybe, the average person. But Kylo has so many ups and downs where he's constantly failing and then succeeding and failing, and it's just more so failure than success. And it makes you not only feel for him, but it also makes you reflect on your own life and kind of pair yourself with him almost. So that's why I would like for him to finally succeed and win. I know we're going off on a tangent here, but I would like for him to succeed and win, because it would show that in life, if you start out not being successful or not winning or basically sucking, you can always turn that around and you can change. However, in Rey's case, it just kind of seems like, you just kind of win everything. So we went on a complete different tangent here, but I didn't intend for that. Anyways, so let me know what you think about Palpatine becoming a clone. Do you think that's what is going to happen, or do you think they're going to take some different angle? Personally, I don't think he's a clone. I don't think he was able to clone himself. I think it would just be too difficult, especially for a Force user of his level and magnitude. It would just be way too complicated, even regardless of Legends comics and all that, which were, Legends. So hit like on this theory if you enjoyed it. Catch you in the next video. Until then, remember, the Force will be with you always.
Now, fulfill